we're back for
Hi,
a third time. How are you, Father Con?
I'm wonderful, Adriana, and I think you can see my face today.
Yes,
I'm in a different room.
the beautiful sunlight is, or the light from the day is shining on you.
Yes, it's very
Yeah.
beautiful.
How are
It's
you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It feels like spring, and when you talk to people who have an appointment for the vaccine, you feel a weight coming off your shoulders that we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I certainly hope so. And you know what? I'll drink to that. I have my coffee. Do you
So
have
do
your
I.
coffee?
I do.
And hopefully the viewers who are watching, you have your cup of coffee or favorite hot beverage, and we're
Right.
like sitting around a table just chatting.
Very good.
So there's some big news with the Pope this week.
Absolutely, probably the most difficult trip he will ever be on. He arrived yesterday in Baghdad in Iraq, and he's going to the land of Abraham, which is
That's right.
in fact this morning he was in Ur, which is the traditional site for Christians, Jews, and Muslims of the home of Abraham, which is a very important event. And unfortunately, in the war, in all the terrible things that happened after the invasion of Iraq, Ur was one of the historic sites that was seriously damaged,
I remember.
and many of the artifacts were removed from there. And this morning, he met. People might wonder, well, these meetings, what are they all about? But this morning he met with Ayatollah Sistani, who is the head of the Shia Muslim majority. And this is the first time that there has been an outreach between Christianity, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Shia Muslim community, and this could be the beginning of a very important dialogue and conversation. In his encyclical, Pope Francis wrote an encyclical last year called Fratelli Tutti, which will probably be one of the most important documents of his papacy. And in it, there is a series of things that he raises in it. But one of the things that he addresses is precisely why he is in Iraq this weekend, and that is that the church must go where people are suffering, and the church must go where there is a need to begin dialogue and conversation that leads to peace and respect and tolerance.
And here's Pope Francis walking the talk, being a witness to his own belief, his own belief of where we need to go. He's showing us the way.
Absolutely. I mean, if people, my background before I went to seminary was history, and people watching him coming down the stairs from the aircraft yesterday say, "Oh, that's nice. The Pope is in Iraq," but in a historic context, you're watching history being made.
Yes.
And there's a photograph which people will see this evening in the news and tomorrow in the news, and it's of it's Pope Francis and Ayatollah Sistani. That is huge. That would be you couldn't have imagined 10 years ago that this would be happening. And here it's happening, and we're seeing it live. So it's important for us this weekend to pray for his safety, the safety of everybody, because there are a lot of people on both sides, who would wish that this is not happening. He is criticized even within the Catholic Church for for this kind of outreach. But when you read Fratelli Tutti, there's the answer. This is why he's there. There were many, many people who did not want him to go.
This reminds me of a video that Bishop Barron did on the Samaritan woman at the well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a fabulous video. And he highlights, or he talks about how back in the day, so again, I don't know the geography, but from his video.
In Jericho.
That Samaria was here. And if people wanted to go across, they would go over Samaria. Mm-hmm. Jesus purposely went through Samaria.
Yeah.
Like he knew what he was doing to meet this woman at the well. The fact that she came at noontime indicated that she wasn't welcome with the other women, because when you're getting water, you get it at the beginning of the day, not in the middle of the day where the sun is at the full heat. So the point is, Jesus purposely went where everyone else avoided to encounter those who he needed to encounter, to show that mercy.
Yeah, that's precisely what Francis is doing. But
exactly.
but like so much of what Francis does, he's doing it so that we will do it. He's setting the way.
He's setting the tone.
That's right. And I mean, those two religious leaders, the photograph that we will see today of this meeting, on both sides, on the Muslim side and on the Catholic side, both of these religious leaders are saying, if we can sit and talk to each other in peace,
then so can you.
So can you. So must you. And another interesting historical insight is that Pope Francis is very, very aware. I mean, he chose the name Francis for a reason.
Yeah.
And he's very, very aware that the original Francis of Assisi also made a very important pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where he reaches out to the Muslim community, and reached out to, and I can't remember the name of the Sultan that he purposely set out to meet him, and ever afterwards the Sultan remarked that this was not, it wasn't just a remarkable meeting, but it was such an important meeting because we met each other as friends. Not as enemies. We met each other as friends. So it's
I learned that about Saint Francis, I don't know, maybe a year ago. Mm-hmm. And it just deepened my admiration and respect for this saint.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, the fact that Pope Francis chose Francis as his name gives me a real solid insight, or gives us all a solid insight into who this Pope Francis is.
Yeah. And of course, the beginning of Fratelli Tutti, the encyclical, is taken directly from Saint Francis's address to his followers, dear friends.
Believe it or not, this is my Lenten practice. I ordered Fratelli Tutti, and I'm slowly making my way through it. And I mean slowly. I haven't gotten too far ahead, but I did read that part on Saint Francis.
Yeah, it's a great. It's a
great.
Beautiful, beautiful document.
Which leads us into our talk, continuing the talk on prayer for Lent, and looking at Father James Martin's book, because there's another. So we hope to get through 5 reasons last week, and we only got to 2 because we just talk and talk and talk. And this is the great thing about just being in a relaxed sort of thing. So one of the reasons we're going to look at why people don't pray, again, through Father James's years of being a spiritual director and being involved in prayer and being a priest. So another reason he says that some people don't pray is because they consider prayer something reserved for holy people, not them. And I think that's what Pope Francis is getting at with this historic meeting with Ayatollah Sistani, that if these holy people can do it, then anybody can do it. Like it's reserved for, it's not just reserved for the holy people. We all have a responsibility, and it just takes maybe the holy people to start the path, to walk that path so it's easier for everyone else to follow.
Yeah.
Thoughts on this reason?
That is true. I have nieces and nephews, and I mean, you can imagine that with an uncle or priest, there's a bit of a reluctance to get any kind of conversation about faith going. But I was with one of my nephews, and we went to, in Toronto to the museum. We were in the museum, and we went into. They have a beautiful collection of Middle Eastern artifacts, actually, and he was asking lots of questions. And as you know, often when you're asking lots of questions, it leads to another kind of a conversation. Mm-hmm. And they had some beautiful books, and I was explaining the books, and he was asking about. Then it got into a conversation about a very famous book in Ireland called the Book of Kells.
Yes,
which is, of course, is the book of the Gospels, which is the four Gospels. And he was talking about how the book was written, and I was talking about the imagination that the monks who sat down to write these, to transcribe these books, mm-hmm. that you actually learn a lot about them, and you learn a lot about their prayer lives, and the illustrations on the side of the book are a wonderful, wonderful example of their own internal spiritual journey. And suddenly he starts talking about his own spiritual journey, but he's not using those words. He's not using that language. And I think he would kill me if he ever knew I was talking about this, I think. But I remember saying to him, that's what spirituality is. That's what prayer is. And he said, "It is?" I said, "Yes." Yeah. I said, each one of us, as we were talking about last week, each one of us in our own unique way have a way. It goes back to those words I was talking about last week: transcendence and grace. Mm-hmm. That it leads us into that deeper conversation. I think you and I recently had a conversation about Sam Harris.
Yes.
Who is one of he would be regarded, he is often held up as a model to people who are non-believers. And, Sam Harris has a really good argument for why we don't believe in God. But Sam Harris often talks about the need for that reflective time, that quiet time. He won't call it a prayer time. Mm-hmm. He's very, very keen on meditation. I wouldn't say that he would necessarily be big on Christian meditation. And I know that he has spent some time in a monastery.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. Pico Iyer is also a very interesting man. He's one of the most interesting observers of what's happening in the world and culture. You'd often see his pieces in newspapers like the New York Times, or he's somebody he doesn't write very often on Twitter, but it's a name to remember. And he again is an avowed non-believer, and yet he writes often about how he will spend a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even a month at a monastery when he was living in California, near his home. And he talks about, last week I was talking about the rhythm of the monastic life. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how he goes there because he has to get back into that rhythm of prayer in the monastery.
But he doesn't use the word prayer?
But he doesn't use the word prayer. He doesn't use the word prayer.
Interesting.
In my experience in the parish and in my own personal life, the people who have had the deepest impact on my spiritual journey would consider themselves to be very inadequate spiritual directors.
Interesting.
But when you we have a hospice just down the road from here, and there are people there. There are men and women, mostly women, but men and women, who practice a kind of prayer with those who are dying that humbles me and astonishes me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So this fear that somehow we're not prayerful enough, or that
or we're not holy,
or we're not holy enough.
Yeah.
I think it's not helpful. It's not helpful at all.
Oh, Father James goes into saying that this sort of thinking, or this sort of excuse, shows that the obstacle really is that we believe that God's love for us depends on what we do for our own holiness. And he writes, but God's love does not rely on us or what we do. Mm-hmm. God's offer of friendship does not depend on our significance, but solely on God's desire for us. And that's a quote by William Barry in his book of Friendship Like No Other.
Yeah.
So I think that's what people need to be aware of. My relationship with God, your relationship with God, doesn't depend on what we do and how many rosaries we pray or how much time we spend in prayer. It's all about God wanting to be with us.
Mm-hmm. Actually, what that lovely quote reminds me of is that sometimes we have to be very careful who we're listening to.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yes.
And sometimes we have to be very careful to the new gurus or the new leaders that begin to emerge, because the gospel that they preach, or the teaching of Christianity that they use, is not a teaching or a gospel that we would use or teach, because they reduce God to a caricature.
Yeah.
That sums up their own personal philosophy, and may also sum up their own personal pathology that they're working out of.
Yes, that's what we don't hear a lot of, that people are often operating out of their own pathology.
That's right. Not, again, to stay away from politics, but I found some of the religious stuff surrounding the election of the new president of the United States stomach turning. When you have preachers up on a dais preaching intolerance and preaching and using the name of God in that intolerance, that is deeply, deeply, deeply troubling.
Do you mean the previous president?
I mean, yes,
not the current one.
I was trying to avoid being specific, but yeah, absolutely. You remember the preacher who was waving the Bible, and she's calling down God to remember on the election results.
Yes.
To swing it in the right way, that the evil has come in, and that, as you and I know, the tragedy are that the hundreds of thousands of people who bought into that.
Yes.
In the name of God. And
I think about this, and I think of, growing up, whenever I heard the tradition, the Catholic Church, the tradition, I'd roll my eyes and like, oh, the tradition. But now I'm actually, it gives us, for want of a better metaphor, it gives us kind of not a measuring stick, but something to weigh anything new. Well, okay, wait, does it fit with what we've been taught in the Gospels? Does it fit with our Catholic social teaching? And then if something new comes in and it's like, oh, that's really, I'm attracted to that, but wait, let me stand it up against the Gospels, the history of our salvation history, our church, And if it doesn't hold to that, then it's like, okay, it's not really from the same thing.
Absolutely.
So I've come to really appreciate our tradition.
Absolutely. That's right. It's not just the word of God alone. That there is more that informs us, and that in our Christian tradition is constantly evolving. Again, at the risk of wading into politics, imagine all, what was so troubling, the strong pro-life position that people take in the name of God. And just a few 100 miles away, in some cases, children are being held in camps. Some are dying, and they've been there for over 2 years, 3 years in some cases.
Yeah.
And you don't see that as a pro-life issue?
Yes.
And so,
people might know Jillian, who is our system chaplain. She and I took this course through Notre Dame, through the McGrath Institute, and it was about the consistent life ethic. And we have to be consistent with our life ethic, right? It's about, from conception to natural death, right? So we value all of it.
Yeah. And so some people would say, so what does that have to do with prayer? Well, actually, it has everything to do with prayer. And maybe sometimes that is the obstacle that people find to prayer. And that is maybe sometimes the reason why people feel that, well, I can't possibly, have a prayer life because I'm not holy enough or good enough. Again, going back to the example of Pope Francis, he said yesterday when he arrived in Iraq, he said, "I come as a pilgrim of peace." I don't come as I don't come as Pope. I don't come as the Bishop of Rome. I come as a pilgrim of peace, with a message of peace. Several years ago, I had the opportunity. I was writing some articles for a magazine that's now defunct, and I was writing some articles about spirituality in different parts of the world, and I was in Southeast Asia, and I met the abbot of a monastery in Laos, in Luang Prabang, who had spent some time here in Canada during the war. He was a refugee and had spent some time down east, and he had a lovely practice. So here he is, the abbot of the monastery, and he has visitors from all over the world because it's a center for learning prayer in the Eastern tradition. And he told me that he goes back to his home monastery every year or every 2 years. And when he goes back to his home monastery, every monk in the monastery has a specific role or a function in the monastery. And his work, so he's the abbot of a very famous monastery.
Yeah.
And he goes back to his home monastery, and he's the one who cleans the toilets.
That's profound.
He says, because that's what I have to do. I have to do that. And it's not an act of humility. He said, no, I have to do that, because again, there's something in the work, there's something in the exercise that is teaching me something that I need to be taught.
Powerful.
Just as those men and women at the hospice, by their very presence, and they're so conscious of for when I come, it's always because somebody needs some spiritual support, either the person who is dying or the family, and they have such respect, and often they'll say, "Father, while you're in there, I'll pray for you," and you feel it. You feel it.
Yeah, it must.
You feel that I'm in this room, but outside at that desk, this anonymous woman or this anonymous man is united with us in here in prayer.
Well, I like to think or believe. I like to believe that if we truly believe that we are created in the image and likeness of God, that God puts that je ne sais quoi when, we're in our mother's wombs and we are created in God's image, that God will speak to us according to our personality.
Absolutely.
And Father James writes that this, because some people, may have those transcendent moments, whether they're, meditating like Sam Harris, but he won't use the language, or people who walk the labyrinth, or they have their, they go into nature because they just find something very sacred and holy there, but they wouldn't really use the language. I like to think, or Father James writes, that God has planted that in us.
Absolutely.
Because if we're created in the image and likeness of God, that will be in us. So we will have a desire for prayer, whether we use that language or not. I think we instinctively know, for most of us, when we're in a holy moment.
Absolutely.
When we just know a moment is sacred, whether it's family members reconciling after years of being at odds, or a family member is dying, and then suddenly things are said that would never been said, that, oh, I really love you, or, you meant so much, things like that. And I think people know instinctively, this is a beautiful moment.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful Irish writer. His name is Colm Tóibín. He wrote the novel that the movie Brooklyn is based on.
Yes.
He grew up in the south of Ireland, in County Waterford or Wexford, and I remember him as a student, being quite an angry writer and very angry about the church. And he wrote a book several years ago called "The Sign of the Cross," and he said travels throughout Catholic Europe. And at the time he was living in Barcelona in Spain, and I guess on his journey in his life, he was arriving at a point where he was asking questions. Writers, that's the nature of writers. Often they want to go a little bit deeper. Yes. And one of the things I think that he was really interested in is, why can't I shake off this Catholicism that drives me crazy? Why can't I just put it aside? Why can't I just put it off? And so he traveled throughout Europe, looking at different ways in which people experience their Catholicism. Yeah. And he came back to Ireland, and a friend of his recommended that he really should go through this therapy experience, where during the experience, his dad died when he was very young. And so he was going to go back in this therapy to that experience, and to other experiences in his life. And he had a very bad reaction. In fact, it was so terrifying and so frightening for him that he felt that he had heart palpitations. And so he's panicking. And he said, suddenly in the midst of my panic, the only thing I could remember to help to bring me calm was to make the sign of the cross. And he said, as soon as I made the sign of the cross, this calm came, this comfort came to me. And since he wrote that book, he writes about how important it is for him. He travels a lot, and he actually spends some time here in Toronto. He talks about how he loves to slip in to the back of the church and to just say a prayer. I'm not quite sure what the prayer is, but he says a prayer.
Wow! As you were telling that, I was getting goosebumps.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story.
I'll have to look out for that book. Every time we meet, we talk about books, and then my list of books to buy grows.
It gets longer and longer. Yeah, very good.
Well, we've been talking for half an hour. We should probably.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I could keep.
We've
talking.
only gotten one.
That's okay. I could. Yeah, but don't forget, we talked about Pope Francis and Iraq and that visit, and that was important to acknowledge as well.
That's true.
Well, I'll see you next week. And for those watching, we will pick up the conversation where we last left off.
All right. Thanks, Adriana. Bye. Have a good weekend.
Happy Lent.